Oh, magic makers. I'm really excited about this conversation today. I know I'm excited about a lot of things. That's why I do the podcast because I get to meet awesome people. So today I have Elizabeth Strenzl, and she is all about boundaries. And you all know one of my biggest things that I tell you why you're not getting healthy and fit. It ain't the diet, it ain't the workout you found, it is your boundaries. And I wanted to find someone who themselves is like, yeah, that's my problem, and I need to fix it. So she actually her tagline is boundaries over BS. And I absolutely love it. But I'm gonna tell you something funny. As I was reading it, like it's all smushed together, and I was like, boundaries are verbs. I literally I had to write it out for me to be like, oh, boundaries over BS because I'm a ding dong. But she is here to give us guidance on setting boundaries. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, it was, and that's a true story. I was like writing it out. I was like,
Yeah, you're not alone. Other people have told me that too. If we could capitalize within a handle, it'd be more clear, but yeah.
but it's still for me. I'm like boundaries of verbs. I'm like, oh, I'm down for it.
Yeah, yeah. They are in action. That's true.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not the grammar police. I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Elizabeth, what I always find is that people come to this type of work, boundary work, burnout work, because they got to the point where their life was like, I can't anymore. So, what was
Yeah.
that point for you that you finally were like, I need some boundaries in my life?
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you something that's going to really sound embarrassing, but hang with me till the end. So I was a
Dang it.
psychologist helping other, I was working as a psychologist helping other people get, work on themselves, improve their relationships. I was working with teens at the time, and still there was a part that just didn't click for me. And I had this like it's very cringe to hear myself say it right now, but it's just true. I had this belief that sometimes boundaries were like a fluffy, self-helpish, nice to have. And I majorly underestimated how lack of boundaries was disrupting my own life until there was this one day where I just was like, okay, this is rock bottom. So I had gone on a weekend out of town. Sometimes we plan these like rest and rejuvenation. Oh, I'm gonna go out of
Mhm.
town, I'm gonna rest, recover, reset, all the things. I went away by myself. I probably slept 80% of the weekend. I come back. So in my mind, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm going to be ready now. By 10 o'clock, I was so exhausted that I actually closed my office door and went to sleep on my desk because I was so exhausted. And I realized in that moment, like, oh, I wasn't just tired and needed a restful weekend. I am exhausted from a life that's running all over me. And my ignorance and arrogance and insecurity and
Mm,
fear that have told me I don't deserve boundaries. Boundaries are silly. They're not necessary. Because that underneath boundaries aren't necessary is really fear for me. And it was an avoidance of like, what's going to happen if I do that? I don't need that. I'll be fine. I don't need that until I did need that. And I literally like was so exhausted. And I had to just be honest with like, oh, my life's running all over me. And I thought with my type A personality and I'm a psychologist, I can just hold it all together, And it's like, no, you can't. And you're actually not helping anyone else when you try to do that either. So had to humble myself and be like, get it together, girl. And when I did and actually leaned in, was like, oh yeah. And then it was mindset work, it was skills. And I think even though I had been working as a psychologist, I appreciated the work so much differently, having then done similar work myself. And once I got to the other side, and not the finish line, because we're always evolving, no one's like done.
right.
But once I got to what felt like the other side or to some kind of freedom, it really ignited my passion to help other women do the same thing because we deserve it. And so many of us are not doing it.
You know, I was, as you were talking, I wrote down like a couple of like kind of words that I feel that most people would resonate with. And your story is what I hear from a lot of my clients, right? It's like, oh, Kim, they need me at work. My kids need me. There's always some
Yep.
external person that needs you. Yet, when you tell me that you're exhausted, your energy sucks, you're like, you could find the energy for that. But like to sit down for 5 hot minutes is just like, something else is pulling my attention. So these five
Yep.
minutes are, I don't deserve it.
Yep. Absolutely. I don't deserve it, and I don't know how I would manage it if I did try, so I don't even venture into that territory. The thing that I realized about myself going through this, and now I help other women, is actually part of why people pleasing continues is because it gets rewarded. We
Yes.
hear positive feedback like, you're so helpful, you're so generous. Oh my gosh, I can always rely on you to bail me out.
Yes.
And so then our ego gets involved because it's like, oh, well, I like to hear that about myself. Yes, I am so helpful. And oh, all these things. And then the ego is its own machine that we have to deconstruct because then you're forced with like, well, wait a minute. If I start to, I know I'm exhausted. I know I have to set these boundaries. But if I do that, are people not going to think I'm generous anymore? Am I not going to be able to be helpful? I still want to be all these things. And we're forced to really deconstruct our understanding of what does it mean to love others well and love ourselves well at the same time.
Yeah.
And navigating that is really hard.
You're absolutely right about the accolades that you get for being selfless. And
Yeah.
in our society, we always like, oh, that person always has the time for me. That per
Yeah.
and you are
Yeah.
like, and you feed off of it, but then you also get the accolade of that you could do it all, right?
Yeah.
Like so it's like you're
Yeah.
selfless, but also the fact that, oh my God, everyone has the same 24 hours, but somehow Elizabeth can
Yeah.
fit in 28 hours. Like she's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. And the thing is, that's an illusion, you know? And so we know it because we're dying on the inside. We're exhausted. We're insecure, resentful, anxious. Our mind can't rest. We're canceling our workouts. We're snapping at our kids. We're blowing off plans with loved ones because the boss asked for something. We know, but we sometimes lack the courage to tell the truth about that
Right.
because it feels good to hear that we're the superwoman that has it all together. We don't want to show our cards. And if there's like nothing else that comes out of this work I'm doing, it's to like sound the alarm to women that like, let's just stop doing that. And I think that a lot of women are stepping up and stepping into that to be like, okay, that doesn't serve me anymore. Like, rest is a very popular and trendy topic right now, self-care. And I'm so glad because we need these things to be honest about our limitations, but we also need the skills to do it. And sometimes what happens when people have the revelation that, okay, I'm exhausted and burnt out. I want to do better for myself. I've been hearing these people talk about these things called boundaries. Let me just go 0 to 100 and not really having the skills to communicate or the self-awareness of exactly what we need or the
Mm,
practice to know how to do it. And then they get in there and it doesn't go well, and it's not because they don't deserve it. It's not because boundaries don't work. It's they just didn't know how.
right.
And how would you know how? Like when I started a business, I don't know anything about marketing or
Right.
advertising. I'm a psychologist. How would I know anything about that? Similarly, if you were not raised in an environment or socialized as an adult to learn certain things, how would you know how to do that? So
Right.
there's no shame. It's like, but let's tell the truth about that so that then we can get access to the resources that we need.
Right. And you said a couple things that I feel I see a lot of my women about rest. And rest, it makes them feel guilty. Like if I'm taking that 5 minute breather, I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
And, and I think it's an American thing because if you go to other countries, they're
Yeah.
they're all about the
Yeah.
slow life, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
here in America, like if I take that 5 minutes, I feel like I'm being lazy, or and it's that internal critic that's
Yeah.
like, Kim, you should be unloading the dishwasher. Why aren't you
Yeah.
throwing a load of laundry in? You could be
Yeah.
mowing the lawn, like all the
Yeah.
other versus it's okay if I take these 5 minutes just to sit here and watch the sunset.
Absolutely. I mean, and honestly, that's where we need to start is what does that voice sound like in your head? Is it even your own voice, or are you
Mm,
picking up ideology from your peers, your parents, your boss, your community? Like the first place that we start is getting clear on recognizing what is the story that's playing in my head,
yeah,
and then starting to challenge that by asking like, well, whose voice is that? Is that true? Do I believe that? How is it serving me to do that? Even if I think this is true for everyone else, am I willing to tell the truth that it's not working for me? And then once
Yes.
we kind of start to challenge these things, then we can replace them with affirmations, with a new belief system. We basically have to reprogram our operating system. And that's not always easy to do because sometimes we're not even aware of what are those things that we're saying to ourselves. Partly because we don't ever sit down to rest. So, how would we have the time for reflection if we're always on the treadmill of doing?
What you just said just like was just like a coconut dropped to my head. Are we willing to like tell ourselves that it's not working?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you see this in your clients. I see it in my clients. They will spin themselves around the axle doing the same shit,
Yeah.
expecting a different result.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like it you have to decide, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? Because
Mm,
sometimes we feel like I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the thing everyone tells me to do. And it's like, yeah, but is it working? Like
yes.
what's more important? Like maybe that did work for Kim. Maybe that did work for Elizabeth, but it doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for you. Like, so what at the end of the day, what is it that you want more? And if you wouldn't it be great if we could just have like this easy, balanced, compartmentalized life without having to do any personal development work? Yeah, I mean, amazing, but that's not
That's
practical.
not
So
how it
like,
works.
yeah, so like if you actually want to be effective, well, what are you willing to do to get there? Are you willing to change your habits? Are you willing to try something new? Are you willing to fail? And that's another thing. People want to
Yeah.
cling to what they feel like
Yeah.
this is the last 5% that I at least feel good about, and now you're asking me to put it down. All I know
Yes.
about myself is that I'm a overdoer mom. All I know about myself is I'm the workaholic that gets promoted. Like, are you
Mm.
willing to put that down? And what are you willing to do?
Yeah, the identity piece is huge, right? Because
Yep.
it's like that's, everyone knows me as blah, right? And if
Yep.
I decide that I'm not the mom that's going to make the cookies from scratch in
Yeah.
500 different flavors,
Yeah.
then who am
Yeah.
I?
I'm not.
I
Yeah.
don't have children. I would,
Yeah.
but I would be the mom on the way to school being like, honey, run up to the grocery store
Yeah.
and grab
Yeah.
however many
Get
cookies
those
you
good
need.
cupcakes you like. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And get back in.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would not be that mom. But I see it all the time. The
Yeah.
women who I work with mostly are, into health and fitness. And so like I'm the fit one. I'm the one
Yeah.
who exercises. I'm the one who works out. And when menopause comes calling and it brings the extra weight,
Yeah.
they're like their world is just like so rocked because their identity, they're like, everyone used to look at me as the girl who was fit, and now I'm the girl in their mind, like I'm the girl who's fat. They might have put on five
Yeah.
pounds, but in their
Right.
mind, they're 500 pounds.
Yeah. And I think that like what you're articulating is really the need to have some boundaries with ourselves of like the
Mm,
things that we will or won't say about ourselves, the things we will or will not do that are healthy, because we think about boundaries as exclusively external sometimes,
mm,
and that there are boundaries that are healthy with between ourselves and other people. But then sometimes it's like I need some boundaries with my damn self because I know the traps that I can fall into. I know the spirals I can go down in my mind. I know the people I shouldn't follow on social because every time I look at their
yeah.
page, I'm triggered. Like we have to, part of taking care of ourselves and part of boundaries is not just everyone else and everything. It's like, well, what boundaries do I need from my own mind while I work to excavate these things that don't serve me anymore? And how can I do that?
I agree 100%. And so as we're kind of going here, maybe someone's listening here and they're like, okay, you're saying a lot of things that make sense. I got that. But what would you say is a boundary so that like everyone listening, we're on the same page, like we're crystal clear.
Okay, awesome. So if you can't say it in an I statement, it's not a boundary because a boundary is a guideline or parameter that governs your own behavior. It is not a rule that governs the behavior of others.
Hmm.
So a boundary that I have is I do not participate in conversations that involve loud yelling or name calling. It triggers me. I know sometimes people just get passionate and their volume goes up, but for me personally, it's a trigger and then I start to escalate and then I'm not showing up in the best way possible. A rule would say, you can't yell at me. A
Mm,
boundary says, I'm not going to participate in conversations if there's yelling. So if that happens, I will remove myself. It's the terms of engagement under which we will or will not show up. So another boundary for me, I do not follow on social media anyone that I was previously dating. I do not follow people that make me feel insecure about myself
mm,
for whatever reason, where I'm tempted to get into comparison culture or whatever.
right.
A boundary is I do not take phone calls past 9:30 p.m. unless it's like an absolute emergency and someone has to text me and say like this is an actual emergency because I need to like decompress and I need to focus my mind. Um I don't go to parties where there's a lot of substance use happening. Like there's just certain things I'm just not going to do.
Right.
And certain spaces in which I'm not comfortable. There are certain topics that I won't talk about with certain people. So boundaries are guidelines that we set up for ourselves that govern how we will or will not show up, the things we will or will not do, the types of things that we talk about. There's certain conversations like I'm just not going to engage. So like if it starts to come up, respectfully, like this is a boundary for me, I'm not going to participate. If they persist, I hang up.
Yeah. You're very generous at the 9:30 because I was like, after 9:30, you better need a kidney.
Yeah,
I'm more like after 7, what do you need? Like,
yeah, 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 yeah,
if you don't need an organ, it'll wait till tomorrow. Or I'm
yeah,
gonna call you at 5:30 when I get up.
yeah. Exactly. You can wait. We'll all
But
be okay.
I love that. And, for you, these boundaries, they seem like it's been an evolution for you. Like you didn't wake up one day and you're like, here are my 10 boundaries.
Absolutely. There's been times that I overreached and I wanted to walk it back. There's been times that I set a boundary and it didn't quite hit the mark, so I adjusted it. I see this a lot, particularly. So one of the things that's like very a hot topic in this space right now is the idea of going no contact, where
Mm,
you fully cut off a friend, family member, neighbor, whatever it is. We especially saw a spike in these type of conversations after the recent US political election because people felt very strongly about those that did not vote for the same candidate as they did.
right.
So there was a lot of conversation of like, I'm going no contact, I'm cutting all these people off. Sometimes that's a necessary and safe thing to do. And if that's where people are, I respect that. And I see you and I know that that's really was very
Right.
tough for you. There are other times where that is a knee-jerk reaction to pain because we
Right.
haven't quite figured out, well, how can I stay in a relationship with this person and still stay safe and respected? Because I don't really want to cut them off, but I don't quite know how to do that. And there's an element of trial and error here. Like you start with your pain points. Okay, what are the things that really trigger you? How might you be able to avoid that? What's a boundary that could facilitate that type of protection? Then you try it. And okay, that worked out great. I can see my mom for 3 hours, but I don't stay overnight.
Right.
Or I can go, whatever it is. And then sometimes it's like, no, actually, right now we're just going to communicate over the phone. We can't see each other. Maybe in 3 months, 6 months, I might change my mind. So
Right.
there's an element of trial and error. It definitely evolves over time.
Yeah.
Like, I am in a co-parenting relationship right now. Our relationship is very positive at the moment. There's been times where it was more challenging. The boundaries I needed at one time, I don't need now. So
Right.
it evolves,
Mm,
and it's okay for it to change.
right.
And it's okay to not know from the beginning, like, what exactly do I need? Like, there's no perfect. We're
Mm.
going to make an informed decision and we'll see how it goes.
So now, everything you just said just makes sense. These are the kind of like my guidelines. This is my operating system for how I want to move in the world. And so as I'm trying these on, pulling them out, how would I communicate that to someone? So if, let's just use the phone call because I think that's the easiest one. So
Yep.
someone calls you at 9:30 at night. I pull up my phone and I'm like, oh, do I just say, you know what? I don't pick up the phone. I look and I just make sure that like no one's on fire. I'm like, that's Sally Sue. And I put it down.
Yep.
Or do I text Sally Sue and say, hey, if this is an emergency, I'll get back to you in the morning.
Yeah. So I think it depends. I think you could do either. I think best case scenario is that if this is a boundary that we anticipate playing a significant role in our relationship or changing the relationship significantly, like maybe Sally has always called you at 9:45 and doesn't know that you decided 9:30 is your cutoff, then yeah, probably want to have a conversation with her in advance. One of the things I work on with people in coaching is like different ways to do it that either meet your preferred style, that meet the situation, that meet how you anticipate the other person might respond. So one way is just simple and direct. Hey, Sally, I don't take phone calls after 9:30 anymore. If it's not an emergency, I'll connect with you tomorrow. Direct with detail is offering a little more. Hey, Sally, I don't take calls past 9:30 because when I do, it really stress. I'm so exhausted the next day. So if it's not an emergency, I'll connect with you tomorrow. The preferred way that I like to do it where it's possible, I call it previewing the concept, positive framing. And I try to keep it light, like, hey girl, oh my gosh, I love talking to you. We have such a great time. We're always catching up. One of the things I've been working on is like how I can show up as a good friend. And I've learned that if I don't get enough sleep, I'm like cranky and miserable and everybody pays for it. So moving forward, I'm not going to be able to take phone calls past 9:30 because honestly, I'm just cranky and I just show up really as a bad friend when I do that. So it's not personal. I love talking to you, but moving forward, unless it's an emergency, I'm not going to answer the phone after that time, but love to talk to you. Call me at 7, girl. I can't wait to catch up. So in that example, you're making it about you, which it is.
Right.
You're framing it positively about how you can best show up in the relationship, but you're still setting a clear boundary and you're not leaving any room for pushback. One of the things that we do as women so often is like we almost take back the boundary as soon as we set it because we're
Yes.
still not fully empowered. And we're like, is that okay? Do you mind? I'm sorry. I know. I hope that
Right.
hurt your feelings. We're not doing that.
Or
It's
you
not
start or
necessary.
you start the conversation like, oh, Sally, so sorry. And you're
Yeah.
just like, you've already
Yeah.
put yourself on like the back foot before you've even
Correct.
told, you don't even know how she's going to react.
That's right. That's right. So I think like if you were listening to that and one resonated more with you than the other, do what works for you. And you fill in the blank with your own style, your own language. I think the main idea here is like boundaries don't have to feel so rigid and mean. And if it's a relationship that we care about, there is value, I think, in offering some insight into why. That
Mm,
insight is not justification, it's
right.
not over explaining, it's not convincing, and it's not asking permission, but it is giving a little insight because if we're friends and I've been calling you at 9:45 for the last 3 years, and all of a sudden you're like, don't call me, I'm going to be like,
What's up?
why?
Right.
What's up? So, yeah.
So, that's great. And one of the biggest things I see for my women is, time boundaries. So, family time, right?
Yep.
So, in their mind, like, yeah, I can totally tell my friends to stop calling me at 9:30. Now,
Yeah.
how do I manage my setting boundaries with my family? And so, it could be, I really want to start going to the gym, but, you know, I'm in charge of dinner or whatever might disrupt the family dynamic. How do I start kind of carving out some time boundaries for myself without my family feeling like, Mom,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So I'll say this before I start. Moms are the most creative and resourceful people on this planet.
except
So
for them, except for them.
exactly. Yes. So I need you to take all that resourceful, work it out, find a way energy and stick it right on yourself in this problem because I know you can do it. I've seen you do it 1,000 times. So the technical of how it will get done, I trust that the moms know how to make a way. I think where the moms struggle is giving themselves permission to do that.
Yes.
And I think that that comes back to identity. What does it mean to be a mom? Am I still a good mom if I go to the gym and my kid maybe was on their tablet for 30 minutes because the babysitter came or dad was busy or maybe whatever the things. Um, and it's I know it's not easy. Like I'm a single mom to a small child. Last year and the year before I trained for half marathon. That
Ooh,
required a lot of time
yeah.
training and a lot of time away from the house. And so I had to have a conversation with her of like, hey, being healthy is really important and so is doing things for ourselves. And just like I want you to be healthy and you have fun times with your friends, mommy's going to do that too. So And I don't know how, your listeners, how it is with their kids. My kid likes to know all the details up front. Otherwise, there's a
Hmm.
lot of stress. So we went through the whole plan. This is the number of times mommy's gonna go running. This is when the race is. So she had all the information, and we talked about it. And I did not ask her permission. I let her know this is what I'm going to do. Here's why. Here's how that might look a little bit different at mealtime or homework time or bath time. And that's it. And then I worked out the logistics. So maybe, my sister watched her one time, another time I had a babysitter. I had to figure out the schedule, but it's really about giving yourself permission. And if you are someone who has a partner, getting on the same page with them about why you're doing it. And even if there's some pushback, like I find I help clients with this in the preparation of, instead of engaging in a back and forth and trying to convince someone, like, ask a question. Are you able to support me with my health goals? This is really important to me. Can I rely on you for support? I notice you're really reacting strongly to me doing the workouts during the dinner time block. Is it actually about the dinner, or is it just about the time? And how can we work towards a solution? I'm letting you know this is important to me. My health is a priority, and I'd like your support. So I think it's getting over whatever the mental hurdles that tell you you can't, you shouldn't, it makes you a bad mom, makes you selfish, all that dysfunctional and untrue stuff that's living up there, and then figuring out your plan and then talking about it and just do it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right because I always say that to them. I'm like, present your, it's like if you were presenting to your boss, like you
Yeah.
present your plan, and in their mind they've already said their person, partner, whoever is going to say no, and I'm like, but you haven't asked them, and if that person isn't going, who's ever going to say I want to get healthier?
Yeah.
Who's ever going to be like, no,
No,
girl, have that heart attack at 40. No one's gonna say.
exactly. Exactly. I mean, if that is actually what's happening, then the conversation there is a lot
There has to
bigger
be a different conversation you
than the
need to have.
boundaries.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's why sometimes making it plain and being like, I want to prioritize my health. I hear you saying no. Are you saying that you don't think that's reasonable? Are you saying that you can't support me? Like, just ask it like that. So, moms, y'all can find a way.
agreed. Because it's like, if you think about the mom who figures out like a freaking, beautiful mind. I got to get kid X to hockey, kid Y to
100%.
ballet, and kid Z here, and find a way to cook
Yeah.
dinner. You figure it all out.
Yes, and like you get it in where you can. I mean, like I live in an apartment building. We have a 0.1 mile size courtyard in the back. Sometimes when I was training, I was running 50 laps around that 0.1 mile courtyard to hit my 5 miles. Like you find a way, you
Right.
find a way.
Right. While your kid was like riding their tricycle, and you're like,
Exactly.
isn't
That's
this
right. Don't
fun?
have a babysitter tonight. Let's get back there. You're going to ride your bike. I'm going to run around. And honestly, it became kind of fun. She and I like to work out together. So you just got to figure it out. You got to
Right.
get creative. And moms are very creative.
And I like what you said, where it's like, you don't know until you know. So you have to ask that conversation. You have to open the door. And if you never open the door, how do you know?
Yeah. And if you actually have no time, then I would say the exercise you want to be doing isn't logistical yet. It's a values exercise of
Yes.
where does your health fit in the other priorities? Because outside of securing your basic needs of shelter and food, we do engage in a lot of activities that aren't actually mandatory. So, really having some of those conversations of how bad do you really want it? Because there's been times that I committed to an exercise plan and I was like, oh, girl, I'm busy because I wasn't that serious.
Right.
And then there's times that I, did 75 hard and worked out twice while single parenting, working and running the business. Like you find a way. So
Right.
find a way.
No. And one of the, you said something that I was like, I never really thought about the internal boundaries. You think
Mhm.
about the external boundaries. So as someone who is maybe that, and you kind of alluded to it, so that internal boundary of, oh, I got to commit to this workout. And, but then all of a sudden you're like, well, I could do 3 loads of laundry. I
Mhm.
could do this, I could
Yeah.
do that versus that internal boundary of like, I'm setting time set for myself to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing that really helps with this, or helps me anyway, is time blocking and like
Mm,
actually forcing myself to stick to the schedule.
mm,
Because I think it's true for moms, it's true for all adults. We can always find something to be doing. So like if we don't want to do the workout, there's laundry, there's dishes, I got to call that person back, I got to book the flight, I got to pick up the dry cleaning. There is always a task that could
yeah.
fill our time. You have to like discipline yourself to be like, no, this is the time. Like 6 to 7 a.m. is the time for prayer, reflection, breakfast. 7 to 9 p.m. is the time for exercise. Like sometimes you just have to force yourself, and if that's not a problem you have, then disregard. If you can like do it on the fly, amen. But for people that really struggle, it's like, okay, so make a schedule. And the same way that you hold yourself to appointments with other people, hold yourself to
Yes.
appointments for you, because you wouldn't just blow off a friend to do laundry. So why would you blow off yourself to do laundry?
There was this woman, she's a psychologist on TikTok, and she did a little skit where a woman's sitting at a coffee shop and she's waiting for a friend, and she picks up the phone and the friend's like, hey girl, so sorry to cancel last minute. And she's like, oh, no worries, we'll get together. And then like, they get the next part. And so it was like last minute, hey girl, so sorry. And it was like, how much more latitude would you give that friend?
Mhm.
And yet we do the same thing to ourselves. Like we're like always like, hey girl, last minute, hey girl, last minute.
Yeah,
And that was it. I'm like, that was such a like very colorful exercise of how many times would you reschedule with that friend before you're like,
yeah,
Elizabeth, I love you, but I'm not gonna take time out of my day anymore for
yeah,
you.
absolutely. And we deserve that. And I think it brings up, what starts out as seemingly like a technical exercise of scheduling really can lead to some deep reflection on our values, how we feel about ourselves, and what does it mean to keep a commitment to yourself.
Yeah. And I always, one of the big things, what steps that I always have my clients do is literally put it in your calendar like it's a dentist appointment.
Yeah.
And, I know my dentist pretty much stalks me to come.
Yeah.
And and I would say like stalk yourself to come. Like if you told yourself at 4 o'clock, I'm going to work out, then it has to be something cataclysmic for you not to have that workout.
Right. That's right. Yeah. You deserve it.
Yeah, you
You know?
do. So, we talked about the friend who calls you after 9:30.
Mhm.
And what if she gives you that pushback that she's like, I have so much going on in my life and I can only call you at 9:45.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends. So in the situation of usually what I'll have people do is like try to keep it light the first time, the second time a little bit more firm, and then by the third time you're trying to think about what the consequence might be. But if it's like you're actually the first time that you told her, like you just said, she pushes back, I think you choose a 1 to 2 sentence party line of,
Mhm.
this doesn't work for me anymore. I'm not going to do this, or whatever it is. I've got if people are interested, find me on Instagram. I'll send it to you. I've got like 25 boundary scripts. I could send it to you for free, different ways to say it. But like 1 or 2 sentences of like what the limit is, and then that's it. Like just don't engage. Like when we entertain a lot of
Yeah.
pushback, it invites just more confusion,
It,
and then we're tempted to backpedal. It's like
it's
just don't even go there.
right.
I understand that you're upset. This is really important to me and something that I need. I'm going to hold the line here. Done.
Right.
Now that is going on, repeat the same thing. Eventually they get tired because they realize like, oh, you're not going to engage. If you've had that conversation and you've been clear on it, but yet it comes up anyway, it's like, oops, girl, you forgot. Remember 9:30 is my cutoff. Like keep it a little light, fun. The
Right.
next time is like, hey, Sally, I set a boundary in this area. You aren't honoring it. This is important to me, and moving forward, and then preview the consequence and be ready, because if you're not comfortable implementing consequences, you're really not ready for boundary setting, because
Right.
otherwise your boundaries are just suggestions. So, and they should be optional, right? So it's, hey girl, did you forget 9:30 is my cutoff? Let's catch up tomorrow. Next time, Sally, I'm feeling a little frustrated. I set a boundary in this area. You aren't honoring it. If this happens again, like, or moving forward, the phone's on do not disturb. Or whatever it is that you
Right.
need. And then you have to decide at a certain point, like, this is a form of disrespect. It's a form of dishonoring your needs. It's a selfish behavior. And then I think you get into territory of like, oh, well, okay, is this a relationship that I want to continue engaging in, even if this person isn't honoring my needs? Because just because Sally doesn't think it's important, if it's important to you, then it matters.
Right. Now,
Mm.
qu question is, have there ever been a time that you set a boundary that it backfired? That it, was there like a boundary fail,
I'm
if you
sure.
will?
Yeah, I'm sure there were. Um, yeah, sometimes I've set too restrictive of boundaries. On socializing. Like if there, I was part of a friend group at one time, and there was one individual that I found myself being really triggered by and not really wanting to spend time with anymore. So I set a boundary that if she was going, I wasn't going.
Mm,
And as a result, I missed out on a lot of connection with the rest of the group because she was always there.
right, right,
And I tried to like do one-off stuff with them, and that like sort of worked, but it wasn't the same. And I realized like I had to really ask myself, like, well, okay, an unintended consequence of this boundary is you miss out on the other friends. What are you willing to do? And so I think I changed it to where like if it was a large enough group that I didn't have to really talk to her,
right,
I would still go. Like I didn't do any like 2 or 3 person meetups when she was there, but
right.
larger group, yeah, okay, I can go.
It's easy enough to
Um,
distance yourself from her.
yeah, easy enough. Yeah, exactly. So that's one. I'm sure there's others that I'm blanking on right now, but
No, but
yeah,
I think because so many of us are like, yeah, that, everything we're talking about makes sense, but like you said, everything is a trial and error. So
yeah,
it could be like you said about the friend group, like, yeah, but then I realized like because I set that boundary, like my social life was like tanked, and I
yeah,
really like being social.
yeah,
Or, especially as a single mom, you're like, I only get a few opportunities to go
yeah,
out. So I need to
exactly,
like capitalize on that.
exactly. Yeah,
So it's kind of us looking at, is the boundary, how much are we losing by the boundary and how much are we gaining by the boundary?
absolutely. Actually, I just thought of another one that is probably a little more in the category of restriction, but I think at the time I thought it was a boundary, and it is connected to like the health and fitness space, and that's around food. So I love desserts. I just like I just love them. And I at one time was like, I'm not eating desserts anymore. Because it's like if I had one, then I would have two, three, four, five, and I would feel like I just had way too many. I would get a sugar crash, gain weight, all these things. And I was like, that's it. I'm not doing any desserts anymore. I'm not allowing myself to have it. I'm not buying it. So it was like an extreme restriction. And for some people that may work for them. For me, it felt like I was unnecessarily depriving myself of something because I didn't trust myself to make good decisions. And then I would just overeat and on other unhealthy foods because I couldn't, air quotes, have the dessert. And so I was like, okay, this is unnecessary. Like why am I doing this? And leaned into more moderation and started to think about like, okay, well, is there like how can I support myself to make healthier choices without feeling like I need to be so restrictive because
Yeah.
then that backfires.
Yeah. And one of the big things I always talk about is that, we think we're being good,
Yeah.
but it always ends up, biting you in the ass because
Yeah.
uh I always say you're like being like Mount Vesuvius, right? It's just like willpower, 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 willpower,
Yeah. Yeah.
and nothing is
Yeah.
safe when you get to that
Yeah.
point.
Absolutely.
Um, this has been like, I one of the things I like about when I find people like you is that you didn't give me anything that was crazy, right?
Yeah, that's good.
It's and you know what I'm talking about. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you've been in the world where like here's your list and I got to do
Yep.
this hard list, and just setting a boundary is hard enough of its own
Mhm.
without you telling me what the rules are to set the boundary,
Yes.
where
Yep.
you made it look pretty easy. Like start small. Like it could just be like you heard about the 9:30 stop taking phone calls, and you're like, yeah, why am I taking phone calls so late
Yeah.
at night?
Yeah.
Like we're not
Yeah.
we're not strategizing how to cure cancer like when we're
Exactly.
talking on the phone. So
Exactly.
it could start with that. It could start with like talking to your family. Hey, I want to take 15 minutes in the morning and start exercising or going for a
Yep.
walk or whatever it is, or being as ambitious as you. Like, I'm running a half marathon. Like,
Yep. Yep. Exactly. It's totally, I appreciate that feedback, and I hope that I do that, when I show up on social and work with clients, because I want to take the scary out of it. Because
mm,
when it feels scary and it feels like rules, who wants to step into that? Like,
no.
we're already stressed out from the lack of boundaries. Why would I then step into something where I feel like I'm not going to be able to be successful? It's too rigid. And the truth is, like, the only way to be truly unsuccessful in this space is to not try and to not show up for yourself. Like, anything, any effort is movement in the right direction. And if that's an area where you need support, reach out because support is available. There's also a lot that you can do on your own. I give out tons of free resources on my account because I want people to feel empowered that there's work that they can be doing to improve their lives because they deserve it. And it's absolutely possible.
Now, is there like, as I'm kind of like hearing this and like everything's starting to click for me and everything's starting to make sense, are there like any areas in my life that I should start to have boundaries around, or it's pretty open-ended depending on what you see?
This is a great question. So this is actually one of the early places that we start along with that story in your head is like mapping your pain points. Like, some people need a lot of boundaries around their personal relationships, others don't.
Mm,
Some people need a lot of boundaries in their family, and for others, they're like, gratefully, I don't have stress in that area. Like, you really want to think about not whether someone should or shouldn't have a boundary in a certain area. It's like, well, what do you need?
excellent.
Like, where do you feel stressed out? Where do you feel exhausted? Where do you feel resentful? I have um like a series of questions that I go through with people early on in the boundary setting process, which is like, what are your pain points? Where do you feel taken advantage of? Where do
Yeah.
you feel stressed out? Where are you avoiding? Where is that spot in your life that you're like, oh, girl, I don't even want to go there?
Yes.
And it's like you've just normalized a lot of pain and dysfunction or stress in that area. So, and I think for some people that's how they use their time. For other people, it's their personal relationships. For other people, it's their family. So I think it's their job. We have a lot of people, and this is actually another reason why I think sometimes people don't always realize boundaries are the solution for them in that moment right away, is because some people can have excellent boundaries at their job and absolutely no boundaries with their mother-in-law. They can
Yes.
have excellent boundaries around their family, and then the job, yeah, what did you say? Okay, yeah, I'll be there. But so, and sometimes like, no, I have boundaries. Did you see how I just did such and such? And it's like, yeah, but I need you to do that over there too.
Yeah, yeah,
What's
yeah.
happening in this area? So it's a personal thing, and I would say start with where you're stressed out. That'll point you to where you could use some boundaries.
And it's so I got hold on, I'm gonna write this down because two things popped in my head. All right. So this is the second time today that I have like raised my hand with two things and freaking balloons popped up. What
Oh,
is
I think
that?
it's because you said the word pop. I'm guessing. I don't
I
know.
don't know, but it's the second time it's happened today, and I'm like, what the hell?
Ah, that's
I guess
funny.
it could have been worse things that popped up.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first thing that made me think about parents,
Yeah.
especially at this age,
Yep.
40
Yep.
plus, depending on what age your parents are, they
Yep.
might need a little more things from you.
Yep.
How do you set that boundary with our parents? Because I have a client, true story, she didn't sleep. And I'm like, why aren't you sleeping? She's like, well, my mom is a night owl. And I'm like, all right, go to bed.
Yeah.
And she's like,
Yeah.
well, I like she has to do all these things to help her mother go to bed. And her
Yeah.
mother doesn't go to bed till like 1, 2 in the morning. And I'm like, how does that seem right? Like,
Yeah.
and she's telling me the story. Sometimes if you say something out loud, you might be like, this kind of seems all
Yep.
up. And
Yep. Yep.
yeah, she's like, so I have to
She's
stay.
doing it.
Yeah. And I was like, I was like, well, can you tell your mom, like, hey, I'd love to do all this, but it has to happen by 10 o'clock. Like,
Yeah. Totally. So I think that this is a really important one, and this is a tricky one because we feel a deep loyalty often to our parents and we want to do right by them. And sometimes, depending on their needs, like cognitively, they're not as rational as maybe they were at one time. So it's a little more difficult to engage in that conversation. I mean, I think that, I even saw this in my own family where different people showed up differently for elders. And I think, like, of course, the place to start is what are their absolute basic needs, right? Like
Yeah.
if they have medical needs, if they need care, there's been times we had round the clock care for certain people in my family, others didn't require that. So like, I think you have to start with just like, what are the absolute
Right.
non-negotiables? And then what are the nice to haves? And then
Yes.
within the realm of nice to haves, like, uh, it's really a question of choosing what type of discomfort, because a lot of times what happens is people will engage in people pleasing or staying up all night, sleeping over, doing all the things because they feel like, well, if I say no, it's going to be really uncomfortable. And it's like, but aren't you already uncomfortable when
Yes.
you aren't sleeping, you can't exercise, and now you have all this trickle down effect. So in that moment, they're making a conscious choice to choose a self-sabotaging form of discomfort over an uncomfortable conversation.
Having the conversation of like, I would love to do this, but it has to happen at this time so that
Correct.
I can get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, and I think like you lead with what you can do,
Right.
and I think you frame it in terms of what you can do. And it's hard because we want to do right by our parents. Some of us have very complicated dynamics with our parents. They may not
Mhm.
always love it. And there's often history there. You're coming up against years of stuff. But
Yes.
I think like you start with what is the absolute medically necessary, most humane minimum, and then orchestrate that. If you're an only child, that is a greater burden on you. If there are
Oh God,
siblings to
yeah.
share it with, you engage others. And then out after the absolute minimum is established, then it's like, okay, well, what can I comfortably do? What are the trade-offs if I do this? What are the trade-offs if I do that? And sometimes, honestly, I work with people and they're not ready to choose themselves. And if you're
Yes.
not, then okay. But I just want you to be aware of the choice that you're making and not see it as, well, I have to, and you don't understand. You don't have to. You're choosing that. And that's okay if that's where you are right now. But would you consider perhaps an alternative? Are you open to some flexibility in that area? And then often like these conversations require a lot of preparation. The
Yeah.
first time that you say the words out of your mouth should not be when you're sitting in front of that person. You should be saying it to yourself through the notes app in your phone, audio recording, practicing in the mirror, telling a trusted friend, rehearsing it on your own, whatever you need to do. Don't let the first time you say it out of your mouth be when you're right in front of that person,
Right.
especially not in a scenario like what you described. It's too high stakes. We get emotional. We don't think clearly. You want to have a plan, and that requires preparation.
Yeah. And what you just said was like spot on for all of this is be ready to choose yourself. And I think, like you got to that point where you just were like, some of us have to hit the brick wall.
Yep.
Even though, we all have those
Yeah.
friends that we see the brick walls coming. And
Yeah.
even if I told you, Elizabeth, like you're just running
Yeah.
yourself ragged, you'd be like, girl, you don't
Yeah.
know. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good.
I got it. Caffeine. I can
Right.
rest.
I'm
Yeah.
just gonna go on this weekend. It's gonna be all good by
Yeah.
Monday. Right. And
Exactly.
then it wasn't all good. And then you're
Exactly.
like, you're like, oh shit, that brick wall hurt. Like,
Why didn't you tell me there was a brick wall? And they're like, girl, we've been trying to tell you.
yes.
You didn't
That's
listen.
right. And so some people have to hit that brick wall in order to be able to
Yeah.
say, you know what, I now have to start choosing myself because I hated hitting that brick wall really hard.
Yep.
It sucked.
Absolutely.
But the other thing you touched on before we got into this was about being stressed. And I
Hmm.
feel that I hear it a lot, and you probably hear it from your clients a lot. It's just my life.
Yeah. Well, it's just the life you've accepted, is
Yes.
how I would say that in a loving way. But I think I try to be very sensitive and empathic to individuals that are in situations of legitimate struggle, and we all have different types of struggle. I also think collectively we have normalized a lot
Mm,
of bad behavior from others, and we have normalized a lot of unhealthy dynamics, mostly as a means to cope
yeah.
instead of to grieve.
Mm,
Because if I tell the truth about what's happening in my relationships, I'm going to have to grieve the loss of the dream that I had for happily ever after, either romantically, with my mom, with a friend, with my own child, with my sister. And that's hard.
Yeah.
So instead of confronting that and allowing ourselves to feel the sadness, anger, disappointment, we tell ourselves, oh, that's just how husbands are. That's just how
Yeah.
bosses are, mother-in-laws. And so there's this collective
Right.
settling and normalizing of bad behavior. So then when we are venting about the very understandable way that that stresses us out, it's like, it's just life. It's just always going to be like this. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, if that's the way you choose to frame it, and that, like, some things, yeah, you're not going to be able to change some things, like I mentioned earlier, my daughter's father and I are not together. He lives in another state. I grieved that for a long time, but I have to move on. I have to be able to say, like, I'm really sad about this thing. Certain aspects of this thing stress me out. And yet, here is what I can do about that
Right.
to improve my circumstance. And there's always a choice. There's always a choice to move, even if it's 1 inch even if it's 5 minutes of rest, even if it's a 10-minute break from the stress, there is always something that we can do.
Yeah. And it's there's a woman I had on the podcast years ago, and it always like that what she says to me sticks with me. She's like, we have to start using data versus emotion. And in those
100%.
moments, it's really easy for the emotions to come flooding to the surface, and you're just all like pissed off and all the
Yep.
things, sad and so forth. And sometimes you just have to kind of like sit with it
Yep.
24 hours, 48 hours, a week, a month before we
Yep.
can kind of say, all right, let's put some logic here and
Yep.
see how we can like make this work.
Yeah, and also, like, part of doing that is depersonalizing other people's
Yes.
behavior. It's understanding behavior is just information. It's giving ourselves permission to hold two things at once, which is this person behaved badly and I might have participated, or this didn't turn out exactly how I wanted, but I can still salvage this. Like, there's so much complexity, particularly in relationship, that we're sometimes blocked from seeing when we're just consumed with pain. So it's like, feel it, let yourself absorb that, and then invite yourself into, well, how can I think about this in a way that serves me instead of just has me replaying everything I don't like.
Right. And just having that soap opera like
Yeah,
loop
all
over
night
and over and
long.
over again.
Yeah.
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 This has been more than I expected. So,
Yeah. This is great.
the one I have two final questions for you.
Okay.
So the one question I have for you, so if someone's listening here today and it's like, what's one thing you would want someone to walk away from this conversation? Like one thing you'd love for them to just walk away from?
I would want them to walk away feeling like you deserve to choose yourself. And that doesn't mean you are selfish, mean, difficult. It's not going to cost you all of your relationships. It's not going to cost you your identity. You deserve it. And there are ways that you can do it. And you don't have to fear turning your entire life upside down.
Now a fun one.
Okay.
What's one thing that makes you feel magical?
Oh my gosh. Dance parties with my 8-year-old. Love those.
That's a good age.
Um, yeah, it's a really fun age. Yeah. Um, what else makes me feel magical? Okay, so I love to cook and I also like home decor. And so those two things converge when you do those like fun looking charcuterie boards or
Oh
platters.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
just like have the most magical time creating these. And especially at the holidays, I really enjoy that. And I think I also feel like a certain element, I don't know if I would say is like magical or it's like there's a sacred space when people trust you
Mm,
with stuff like this. It's such a
yeah.
privilege and it's such an honor. And I don't always get it right. We all, make mistakes in this work. But when I feel like I really connected with someone and gave them back to themselves, like
Yes.
that's like, yay, then
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
it's it's awesome.
I know that feeling because you're just like, they feel like they're in this impossible situation, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden you show them there's the path, and you kind of feel like, the Wizard of Oz. You're like,
Yeah.
God, all I had to do was click my heels together. Thank
Yeah. Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you're on social media. Where can people find you on the socials?
So you can find me on Instagram, Boundaries Over BS. And I'm recently on TikTok, kind of experimenting over there. So
Hmm.
that's for like the fun, that's for the giggles. But the gems and all the meat of the work mostly is on Instagram right now. But the handle is the same on both, on TikTok and on Instagram, Boundaries Over BS. And then if you once you get there, I have like a website, easy way to access a lot of the free resources that I talked about here. You can sign up for a discovery call if you're like, okay, maybe, but let me check her out and see, if it's
Right.
a fit. You can get all that stuff on Instagram.
She's definitely a fit because I stalked her. You know how I am. I got to make sure they bring the goods when they get on the show. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being on the show. I learned some stuff today, and those of you guys listening, I hope you learned something as well. And if you did, do us a favor, tag us on the socials and let us know what's that one takeaway, or
Yeah.
share it with a friend who's like, girl, you need this.
Yes, this was awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I love the conversation.
You're welcome. All right, Magic Makers, you know what to do. Listen to the episode, find a friend, and let us know what you took away.